to day 1 of 1 week faculty development program on the topic National Education Policy, A Way Forward. This faculty development program is organized by Babu Banarsi Das Educational Group Lucknow in collaboration with Indian Council of Historical Research ICHR and Indian Council of Philosophical Research ICPR, Ministry of Education, Government of India. This program has been conducted under the utmost support and guidance of our chief patrons, Mrs. Alka Das Gupta ma'am, Chairperson, BBD Group of Education, Shri Virat Sagar Das sir, President, BBD Group, Dr. Arvind P. Jamkhedkar sir, Chairman, ICHR, Ministry of Education, Government of India, and Professor Ramesh Chandra Sinha sir, Chairman, ICPR, Ministry of Education, Government of India. The patrons for this program are Professor Dr. A.K. Mittal sir, Vice Chancellor, Babu Banarsi Das University, Lucknow, Professor Dr. Bhavesh Kumar Chauhan sir, Director, BBD ITM, Lucknow, Professor Kumar Ratnam sir, Member Secretary, ICHR and ICPR, Ministry of Education, Government of India, Dr. Omji Upadhyay sir, Director, Research and Administration, ICHR, Ministry of Education, Government of India, and Professor Dr. Monica Mehrotra ma'am, Director, BBD EC, Lucknow, who is also the convener of this program. The organizing secretaries for this program are Dr. Suresh Kumar sir, Assistant Director Seminar, ICHR, Ministry of Education, and Dr. Shivangi Tiwari ma'am, Assistant Professor, Department of Management, BBD ITM, Lucknow. And the organizing coordinators are Dr. Sushim Dubey sir, Program Officer, ICPR, Ministry of Education, and Ms. Priyanka Singh ma'am, Assistant Professor, Department of Management, BBD ITM, Lucknow. I again welcome each and every one of you and also thank you all for actively participating in this program. Now, before starting this session, I would request our Director, Sir, Professor Dr. Bhavesh Kumar Chauhan, Director, BBD ITM, to welcome our resource person and grace us with his kind words, as he has always been a pillar of strength and support to all of us in various endeavors and has also been a constant source of motivation and inspiration. So please be kind and carry forward.
Thank you, Ishita Mishra, as well as Organizing Secretary, Dr. Shivangi Tiwari. On behalf of our management, the chairperson of Babu Banarsi Das Educational Group, Srimati Alka Das ma'am, President Virat Sagar Das ji, and patron of this program, like Vice Chancellor of BBD University, Honorable A.K. Mittal ji, and my patron, Dr. Monica Mehrotra, who is also the chairperson of this NEP Council for the BBD Educational Group, Dr. Monica Mehrotra. And of course, the heads, Member Secretary Kumar Ratnam ji and other council heads. It's a really privilege to welcome our Honorable Speaker for the day, Dr. Chetan Singhai, who is the Director of Ramaiya Public Policy Center. Sir, we really welcome you on behalf of this organizing committee with talented students as well as our organizing secretary and co-secretaries from the councils. And as we all know that Dr. Chetan Singhai is a highly decorated professor and has been a key member in drafting of national educational policy and has been associated with topmost QS world ranking as a senior consultant. So he has a diverse exposure beside being an academic council members and nominated for so many committees by the government of India in past as well as currently. So I'm sure that is a right way to have a takeoff for this program. And I really welcome all the members who are attending this FDP. I really wish you all the best on behalf of all the organizing committee. And I'm sure the government of India put us to really, first of all, make an awareness in the right perspective to all the stakeholders of this educational sector. This program will accelerate that process as per the expectation of Government of India, and all of us will be benefited out of this FDP, seeing the diverse range of the speakers who have been at the helm of affairs while drafting. So it's really an honor to welcome you, Dr. Chetan Singhai, and thank you, Anchor, for this privileged opportunity. Over to the issue.
Thank you so much, sir. Participants, please mute yourself. It is a humble request. All right. So now, when we start this session, one thing comes in mind that what is the need to formulate and understand this education policy? Well, one of the many reasons for this is that according to United Nations Population Fund, India, our country, has entered a period of 37 years in which we have the availability of demographic dividend. Now, another question is, what is demographic dividend? It means that currently our youth population is 62.5% of the total population, which implies that it is that phase in our economy in which we can harness the maximum economic benefits through this demographic dividend. Hence, this education policy will bring about substantial change in youth development as it has become a necessity for our country. Therefore, through this FTP, we will enhance our knowledge of the national education policy by understanding each and every aspect of it through and through in order to reap the best results out of it. Now, without wasting any more time, I would request Mr. Adarsh Dwivedi to welcome and formally introduce our honorable session, Professor Chetan Sangai, sir, Deputy Director, Ramaiah Public Policy Center, Bengaluru. Adarsh, over to you.
Thank you, Ishita. A very good morning, one and all present here. So, first of all, I know all of you are here to learn something. So, our respected audience, I would like to tell you, you are at the right place. Our today's resource person is distinguished young educationist and winner of plentiful titles. He is none other than Deputy Director of Ramaiah Public Policy Center, Bengaluru. I would like to welcome Dr. Chetan Sangai, Associate Professor at Ramaiah Institute of Applied Sciences. He received his PhD from National Institute of Advanced Studies, Indian Institute of Science Campus, Bengaluru. He completed his MPhil in Law and Governance at the Center of Study of Law and Governance, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He obtained his master's degree in political science from the Center of Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is awarded with Erasmus Mundus Scholarship to pursue masters in United Kingdom, Denmark, and Spain. He is also associated as a research fellow in Janaagra Center and as research associate with the Department of Administrative Reforms and Public Grievances. He is a recipient of Social Justice Medal awarded by the Ministry of Law and Justice, Government of India, for his service towards human rights and women empowerment by the Honorable Chief Justice of India in 2007. He was also the member of Commitment to Finalize National Education Policy 2020 by MHRD. He was associated as member secretary to review the quality mandate relating to the promotion of research and regulation of India and many more achievements. On the behalf of Babu Banarsidass Educational Group, I would like to extend my heartfelt welcome, sir. Please grace us with your knowledge and experience. Over to you, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adarsh, for that elaborate introduction. I think I'm more a learner than anybody else, so I'm here to learn with all of you. First of all, my greetings and sincere gratitude to the university management to consider me as one of the resource person to engage with the faculty members coming across the country, crossing 200 mark now already. Thank you, Ms. Shivangi, Dr. Shivangi, for identifying myself here to be along with distinguished experts and leaders of the university. And I'm sure I'm excited to be part of the university because incidentally, the Vice Chancellor of your university, Professor Mittalji, is already part of the steering committee of Uttar Pradesh Education in order to engage with higher education implementation aligned with national education policy. So you're actually at the heart of implementation process. So it is definitely a very interesting occasion to engage with the theory behind the policy making, as well as the concepts of the policy and the recommendations, so that we can engage in dialogue and debate about the implementation process. So thank you once again. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Professor Bhavesh Kumar Chauhanji, for your initial inputs. Thank you all, and I look forward for discussion. So I'll just have few slides because
Sir, with your permission, Dr. Chetan Sangai,
yes,
I would also welcome Dr. Vivek Kumar Singh. He's a very dynamic professor and director of BBD NIIT. He's also on the forum to listen to you, sir, and along with his faculty members. So on behalf of the committee, I also welcome him. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for joining us for the discussion. I'll share the slides because The essence of the policy is in its content and the text, and you have to read the text in a particular context, as rightly mentioned by Ishita Mishra in her brief opening, that how the demography dividend is so critical for the country. And most of the faculty members who are here are also within the demography dividend. So I think it's important to understand the text in a context and then critically engage with its implementation process. So with that, I'll share my slide. Uh, one of you can give a clue whether you are able to see the slide full
Yes,
screen.
it's visible.
Okay, thank you. So I would, if at all there is any lack of clarity in voice or the screen, please do let me know. Okay, because I'll
Sure.
just close the video. Yeah. One more request to the organizer that if you can accept people coming in, then I would be able to see the slide fully. Thank you so much. So I am here to speak specifically on institutional restructuring and consolidation to the faculty members and also administrators and key decision makers. It kind of becomes important for us to appreciate first what the policy envisages and then get into the nitty-gritties of it. But also to most of you, giving an insider perspective of the policy making, because I had two roles to play in the entire policy making. One was in the initial Dr. Kasturangan committee, I was the chief consultant, where we had to engage in a lot of research background work to engage with the committee. And second was a committee to finalize the draft NEP, where I was a member of that committee along with three members who are part of the drafting committee. So that way it gives us a very important insight. And for you who are going to be engaged with higher education in due course, must know the policy life cycle or the policy life process. So I would like to share that now in the next slide. If you see on the screen, let me pull out the pointer so that we can, yeah. So when a policy has been made, right, a policy has an organic entity. It is not very mechanical. It is not something which is very completely objective. You know, it has to take into a lot of, life histories, experiences, and so on and so forth. So for that, there are processes which are in place to inform you or to let you know what went behind it. There was an approach which the committee adopted, and every committee has its own approach, whether it's the 1968 policy or 1986 policy. Each policy has its own approach. The approach adopted by the NEP draft 2000, the technical secretariat where four of us were engaged, we had to review them word by word and see what emphasis they tend to engage and what have not emphasized. And how does it become relevant for 2020 and to 2040. Then there were consultations also which were held across India by the members and sometimes through posts, through portal, through social media, the comments which were coming. Then from these three steps, 25 themes were identified by the committee to narrow down, because we need to have a skeleton, we need to have an outline. And policy making is something which becomes critical here to identify 25 themes. One point I would like to make here is that when these themes were identified, they did not consider, the committee did not consider school education, higher education as two different entities. They have to be seen as a continuum. And what happens in school education level will impact higher education level. That was something very unique in a way, that approach you can consider. Then following that was the consultation with key stakeholders also, because from these themes, the information gathered in these three steps were also accommodated in the themes, and these themes were further discussed with consultation with key stakeholders who engage in the practice or the engagement of the day-to-day life of higher education. Then also parallelly, we were looking into global best practices. Now, when I say global, it was not the developed world always. It is not the UK, US, and the developed world. It is also the developing world. Like, I would urge most of you who are in teaching profession, I would urge you to look at the National Education Policy of Bhutan, which is publicly available document. And you can see how much emphasis they have on learning, competences, teacher, how important it is a teacher in school and higher education, for example, which also we see reflection of some of those themes or some of those ideas accommodated into our local context to India, what is required. And also you can see how education in Bhutan becomes an instrument for happiness. As you must be knowing, most of in management must be aware about gross national happiness index, which Bhutan pioneered. And most of the developing world today, Denmark and all are ranked high, but Bhutan is one of those pioneering countries. And how they see education as a link to happiness. Yeah, can you hear me? Some of you can. I was muted for a second.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, sir, very much.
Thank you. Then here I would like to provoke most of you here, not all of you, but most of you. Why I would like to provoke to you to think, because you're in FDP program and you are now, usually FDPs are meant for, for our own sake, to improvise, to enhance our knowledge and way of thinking. So I would like to provoke here while I talk about what it was. So literature survey was also conducted to identify what is the current thinking about higher education, which is mostly empirical. So when you talk about literature, there is also biographies and autobiographies of various university leaders who have lived by their experience, who have lived by their time and written in retrospect what all they have done and what all they have contributed. But empirical kind of work was something which was very critical for analyzing and including into the draft NEP. But unfortunately, we did not find many Indians writing about Indian higher education system. It was mostly the West coming here and writing. One name I can give you to Google for you for further discussion is Philip Altbach, Altbach. Philip Altbach is one of the few names who has written a lot on Indian higher education. We have newspaper articles, we have editorials, opinion pieces, no doubt about it. But as an empirical research piece on higher education per se was very limited. Maybe it is in vernacular language, but it could not be reached. But at least in a popular domain, universally accepted, peer-reviewed kind of work was very limited. That's why I would like to provoke you to start, because we are in the thick of higher education process. We are just there in the center of day-to-day activities, but writing about it, whether it's about accountability, autonomy, students' life, so on and so forth. We have so much of data that we are exposed to every day. Converging then becomes very important. That is my personal point of view. But coming back to the policy life cycle, so these were the processes which was taken place parallelly in order to build on the draft, right? And of course, all the inputs coming from here, there was this committee which was constituted, reflected, discussed, debated, deliberated, engaged, analyzed, then brought into the committee, which was submitted in May 2019 when the second term government was announced. And after the swearing in ceremony, they immediately next day itself, they handed over the document to the MHRD. Now this red line here is where I would like to again bring to your attention, because after the draft was submitted, if most of you might remember, it was in public domain for feedback, for comments, suggestions from the country, and of course across the world, because it was in internet out there in public domain. Now those comments must be given due attention and due justice must be made in order to understand, evaluate those comments. There was another committee which was formed called as Committee to Finalize the Draft NEP. Now the finalization process is to reflect on the comments and then revisit the draft, re-engage with the draft and make amendments or take out policy points which were not relevant and all those things. That process was there in this red line here, where there were around more than 5 lakh comments received from various parts of the country and also from many NRIs who are across the whole paraphernalia of the country, who are represented across the world. They gave their feedback and those were analyzed, and then accordingly the final draft was submitted to the cabinet, which got approved in on July 29, 2020. Now this was a policy life cycle. So you would want to know that, because sometimes it so happens that we would criticize the policy without understanding the life cycle, because when a policy is made, it has to take into account all of this dimension. And sometimes we say, oh, they took 3 years or took 2 years, that it means there is a lot of process behind it. So in fact, I was telling to myself that I was a policy pessimist, always sitting at back and saying, okay, this policy is not acceptable and all. But I became a policy optimist, seeing the process, the complexity in making it. That's the point. But to come back to my last point here on this slide is, we need to appreciate the context of the policy in terms of it has gathered sufficient or lot of evidence to make those policy recommendations. That is why the draft was so huge, 484 pages, because each of the policy points backs with a rationale, with appropriate data to say why they want to make this recommendation, which I'll discuss through my presentation. But that is what I wanted to drive here to most of you who are listening to this insider view first time. If you listen to it, pardon me, but if it is not, then I would want to you to appreciate that point in your mind. Now, moving on, from this exercise of the policy life cycle, the National Education Policy, the committee, considered 11 critical challenges which are exposing our country's higher education ecosystem, and we need to address them. So if you read, when I present now the 11 points, please also think on further that whether they are really challenges or whether they are not a challenge, and we can have that discussion there, number one. Number two, how these challenges are now reflected into policy recommendations to overcome those challenges. So I'll go one by one. One, this is the most important point for today's discussion that I want to build on, that is higher education system, ecosystem, which includes colleges, universities, standalone institutions, and so on and so forth, and students, faculty members, and so on and so forth, are severely fragmented. I will talk about fragmentation later, but it is fragmented, and we need to address that problem. Second, there is less emphasis on development of cognitive skills and learning outcomes. Also, please appreciate the fact that these challenges are for majority of the institution. There are exceptions. As Philip Palbach himself says, higher education system in India is characterized as islands of excellence in a sea of mediocrity. We do have islands of excellence. There are institutions who are doing most of these challenges, that they are already overcome those challenges, but they're still few. They are not the majority. But when policy is being made, they have to consider the majority into account, and while appreciating the few who are doing what they are doing in terms of innovation excellence. But this is a big problem, that higher education institutions do not focus on cognitive skills and learning outcomes. We might have learning outcomes listed, but how are we translating that into practice? If we are doing it, then what is happening to our demographic dividend, and what are the challenges they are facing? Then there's a rigid separation of disciplines. We as faculty members also sometimes create silos, that we are wedded to a particular discipline, commerce, arts, science. And also students, moment they enter into their 11th and 12th, they're exposed to early specialization. They don't have much space to think through their maturity, through their life cycle of learning. They don't get chance to be little flexible and have choices beyond that. That is a challenge that we see both at the faculty level as well as the student level, as well as the institution level. We have University of Agriculture Science, we have Technology University, we have Medical University. That kind of specialization structural level also is a challenge. Then accessibility is a big problem, and it continues to be a problem. It's a perennial problem since independence. We have not yet achieved universal education, not even mass education. We are still very elitist, with 26% of the gross enrollment ratio, as compared to countries like South Korea, which has 94% of gross enrollment ratio of the eligible population in higher education. It still continues to be a problem. Then limited teacher and institutional autonomy. This is another issue which I would like to discuss more at the institutional level, at least in the majority of the institution. Then inadequate mechanisms for merit-based career management and profession of faculty and institutional leaders, right? Then lesser emphasis on research at most universities. This also becomes very important for today's discussion. Lesser emphasis on research at most universities, and importantly colleges. By being college doesn't mean we don't want to do research. I know there are challenges of 16 hours of teaching per week and so on and so forth, but we need to address those challenges, and NEP tries to bring in certain policy recommendations. Suboptimal governance and leadership of higher education institutions. We might have passionate faculty members, we might have very equally passionate students, we have very nice ecosystem, but if the leadership and governance is not there, then it might not lead to what it has to lead to in terms of quality. Then let me also bring to your attention, while you can look at some of these issues at institutional level, at the systemic level, what you call at the meta level, there is ineffective regulatory system. In fact, in the draft NEP, they use the word a disempowering regulatory system, right? But in the revised one, they have mellowed down a bit, saying it's ineffective. It does not support, it does not facilitate, it does not promote innovation and thinking. We need to revise and revisit the regulatory system, so that both at the meta level changes are there, and at the micro level institutional changes are also to be accommodated there. And then might not be relevant to you as a university, but those who are representing from a affiliating university, you might have got exposed to this challenge. That affiliating university, which is an unfortunate gift from our colonial time, has continued to be there with us, while most of the university UK have moved out of that system, and has continued to become a problem in terms of resource utilization and maximization of teaching, learning, and all so on and so forth, because they limit innovation, because most of the faculty in affiliated universities are busy or engaged with conducting examination. They have become more like an examination centers, but not much happening, at least in most of the universities, in terms of outcome, right? So these are the 11 major challenges. But while I talk about the institutional restructuring and consolidation, now I want to take through the context for why this recommendation of institutional restructuring and consolidation was made. Now, this is the major set of challenges, and each of these challenges are addressed in the chapter on higher education in the policy document. And as a result of that, you can see that. But institutional restructuring consolidation is one such recommendation which addresses few of these challenges, which I'll talk to you. Now I'll take you to the complex triad. Now, the policy, every policy must have an objective. In this case, for higher education, specifically sector of higher education, the NEP has this objective. That is, the objective is to revamp the higher education system, create world-class multidisciplinary higher education institution across the country, increase GR at least to 50%, from 26 to 50% by 2035. So there is what you call quality, that is world class. Here means not world class by the ranking rating kind of thing, but world class meaning it should be one of the best, like our Nalanda Takshashila model. You know, must be multidisciplinary, learner centric, engaged, vibrant, and all those things. At the same time, it should have it should increase accessibility, and also at the same time should have equity inbuilt in it, in terms of ensuring the 50% of the population engages with it. And it also has accountability, that is temporality. 2035 is the upper time that has been provided in order to achieve that, so that you can hold the implementing agencies accountable to that, which is missing in the 68 and 86 policy. We don't have this temporality component, that is by when you need to achieve. The idea was there, vision was there. Not that these policies were not relevant. They have shaped higher education to the extent that is, we are all there. We are all beneficiaries of that higher education system. But temporality in the policy language becomes very critical, because when you see policy, the word policy here, if you want to break it up for your reference, this additional point, PO means periodically organized, LI means legally induced, CY means for calculated yields, YIELDS, yields. So what is legally induced? Any policy must be periodically organized. We are now looking at last policy 34 years ago. Very much, we are quite delayed in our having a policy. LI is legally induced. So we have to always keep the constitution as a point of reference. And CY, calculated yields, who are the beneficiaries and for whom it would be affecting and for what purpose. So that way, policy objective is to keeping this in mind. So in essence, the 11 challenges can be subsumed under 3 critical challenges. If we are able to overcome these 3 challenges, one could say that most of the issues can be addressed in higher education. And that is why institutional restructuring and consolidation is one such policy recommendation, which becomes critical for overcoming this. That is, this institutional autonomy, limited teacher institutional autonomy, suboptimal governance and leadership, and disempowering. I am going to use the draft language, though in the revised version it is ineffective. So if these 3 are addressed, we are able to see that there is a change. To overcome these 3 problems or challenges, NEP recommends the need for institutional restructuring and consolidation. Now, I will now go to the context of why it was thought that we need to, in addition to these 3 challenges, what are the issues for which the NEP 2020 or the NEP 2090 both realize the importance of having institutional restructuring and consolidation. First set of points for the context. To give you the fact, as I said, the policy is evidence-based in sense that it was also driven by experts and experience, but it was backed by evidence. That according to All India Survey of Higher Education, we get a data that 950 plus universities of that time, now it has been increased to 1000 plus. While we are talking, there will be few more that have been added. But anyways, then it was 950 universities and approximately 44,000 plus colleges that we have in India. Now, what has happened over time is, out of this 44,000 colleges, 40% of the colleges in the country are only single discipline program, like commerce college, arts college, science college, and so on and so forth. Single discipline program, around 40% of the 44,000 plus. And they are far from being multidisciplinary in style, which is required for the 21st century skills. As rightly mentioned, that demographic dividend demands multidisciplinarity, and the employability and employment factor is dependent on multidisciplinarity. Then why it is fragmented? Because 20% of the 44,000 colleges have enrollment below 100 students, while only 4% of 44,000 plus colleges have enrollment of over 3,000, as per All India Survey of Higher Education. So this is a huge fragmentation, because on one hand of the spectrum, we see 20% colleges with less than 100 enrollment, with hardly any faculty member or any teaching faculty at all, because it's not resource friendly, because most of these colleges around 67% of 44,000 colleges are private run institutions. So for them, it is very difficult for having resource mobilization, resource utilization in that sense. And with less than 100 students, where student fee becomes an important component of revenue for that institution, given that they are private run institution. So how does it become critical for them to run? And what will happen to these? Not only the faculty is not there, but also there is little or no education taking place. It's a simple logical kind of a thing, right? So it creates that false accessibility of a sort, that okay, there are this many colleges, so hence there are this many students there, but students are not willing to go there. But if this is a problem, then how are they able to engage if there's no resource, if there's no commitment, if there's no teaching faculty? So this became a big challenge. That's why I said challenge one was severely fragmented higher education ecosystem, and that's why consolidation becomes very critical of these institutions. Hence, fragmentation of system leads to severe suboptimality on various fronts. One was resource utilization suboptimality, that is fragmentation of this kind. Second, the range of number of programs and disciplines, because you don't have funds, you don't have students, you don't have faculty to engage in multidisciplinarity, so you continue to become siloed. The range and number of faculty is going to be very limited, and the ability to carry out high quality multidisciplinary research. Teaching is one thing, teaching itself is not happening, but then research becomes challenging. So in essence, one has to address this problem immediately. And that is why this policy looks towards this as an immediate context to have institutional restructuring and consolidation, especially the consolidation component. Then second important context was to make it learner centric. As you have read the policy in the newspapers and policy per se, it talks about progressive completion. 1 year, if a student completes, they get a certificate. 2 year, they get a diploma. 3 year, they get a degree. And there's a lot of not only lateral entry and exit, but also there is delayed entry and exit. You can always come back as per your choice across discipline. So that kind of flexibility is inbuilt into that to harness multidisciplinarity, skill-oriented program, and so on and so forth. So that needs further consolidation of institutions, because the current system of institutions are unable to accommodate that kind of flexibility and choice which is envisaged in NEP 2020. As a result of that, institutions have to restructure themselves, which I'll come to that. So that is another context for why institutional restructuring consolidation becomes important. And then moving to the second slide of context for why institutional restructuring. There are 2 points I shared in the earlier slide: fragmentation, then flexibility, and progressive completion are 2 important reasons why it becomes important. I'll come to the what part. I'm talking about the why part now. Why is that we need to critically look at institutional restructuring consolidation? The what of that is the NEP. I'll come to that. Now the why part continuing. NEP says the objective, another objective under institutional restructuring consolidation, NEP 2020 says, is to create vibrant multidisciplinary institution of high quality that increases capacity of higher education in India and ensure equitable access. The earlier objective I showed was the macro level policy objective, enhancing GR, quality of education, and so on and so forth. But here, the objective for having institutional restructuring consolidation is this: to create vibrant multidisciplinary institutions of high quality, which would be embellished and also accounted in terms of equitable access. Now, the context also, when we talk about the new institutional architecture, this is the why part, but I'll come to the what is that institutional architecture. The new institutional architecture must be large, well-resourced, vibrant for teaching and research, multidisciplinary, and which will significantly expand reach and capacity. That's the vision. Why so? Because we have to increase our GR. So if you have large institution, we are able to resource them well. We are able to provide both human and the other financial infrastructural resources if they're able to consolidate. And that's where they can go into increasing GR of 50% by 2035. At the same time, they can emphasize on core functions of teaching, research, and service, and also increase emphasis on research. If the moment you are multidisciplinary, there is a high chance of you becoming more and more innovative and creative in pursuing research, as well as you are large, which gives enough opportunity for faculty members to balance their teaching and research time and resources. Then it has to, why we need to restructure and consolidate is to harness multidisciplinary teaching and research, ensure institutional autonomy, because the moment you are smaller, moment you are affiliated, you tend to become more and more accountable. So as and when you want to grow bigger, and that's why most university institutions, autonomous colleges are pushing themselves to become universities, because they will be able to get due autonomy and recognition. Then at the same time, why we need to restructure and consolidate is because moment you are able to categorize yourself to the new mode of restructuring and consolidation, you are able to enhance your governance and leadership, because you will get a direction, you get a sense of framework through which you want to build. And for example, the NEP says to enhance governance and leadership, you need to have independent board of governors to who will engage with sense of responsibility and accountability. Now let me move on to the pointers. What does NEP talk about institutional restructuring and consolidation? Number one, NEP defines what is a university means, right? A university should mean, and technically should be, multidisciplinary institution of higher learning. And it should offer undergraduate, graduate, and PhD programs, and should engage in high quality teaching and research. These are the three important characterization of a sort which has been laid in NEP. Now you might be able to immediately connect to the problem. The problem of the current system is there, as I said, there are universities which are unidisciplinary or specialized universities. As I said, agriculture university, technology university, medical university, and you can just name them. There are many such discipline specific universities, and that itself does not become university per se. They just become a standalone institution. But a university should ideally mean multidisciplinary. And there are institutions who don't engage in undergraduate, only graduate and PhD program. There are institutions who only engage in undergraduate but not much in graduate and PhD program. So you can see those kind of permutation combinations. But what NEP says, irrespective of that, what has happened in the past is one. But going forward, when you talk about a university, must mean this: multidisciplinary, should offer all levels of education with high quality teaching and research. There might be universities which does all of that, but they are not engaging research, but they're still limiting themselves to teaching. That is also another issue. Especially many of the public state universities, they might be multidisciplinary, they might be offering UG, they might be offering undergraduation and PhD program, but they're mostly teaching universities, not much research. Most of them, not all, most of them. So that is one important point the NEP very clearly lays out. Second, and most of you faculty members who are looking at pursuing further career in teaching, you must be cognizant of this fact that if this NEP gets translated into action as an implementation, which is happening in especially UP, it is already been steering committees established, task force established, Karnataka it has been established, Himachal Pradesh is established. So if that happens, then it is important to understand and appreciate this meaning and engagement of an university, and we have to adopt and adapt to that frame of thinking. Then moving to large multidisciplinary universities and higher education institution clusters is the biggest and highest recommendation that NEP makes in terms of institutional restructuring and consolidation, and for defining quality of teaching and learning. And universities should be multidisciplinary, as I mentioned. And moving to the specific points, NEP recommends that from the current system of higher education, where we have institutions which are defined by ownership. What do you mean by ownership? Public state university, central university, private state university, private deemed university, public deemed university, institution of national importance. Then we have state open universities. Then we have central open university, the Indira Gandhi Open University, for example. So we have really this 8 types of universities itself. On the other hand, we have colleges, private aided, unaided, autonomous, affiliated, constituent colleges. So you see, that's a complexity of this structure. But this logic behind this structure was, if the state is funding, that is in terms of salary, in terms of resources, infrastructure and all, then, and that is usually like the state university, that is called the public state university. If a sponsoring trust or a body is for managing its funds and revenue and supporting the growth of the institution, then it becomes a private university. Similarly, there are, so basically it's public, private, public owned, private owned, and so on and so forth, but not necessarily they were based on their function. Anywhere in the world you go, any university will engage in 3 core functions: teaching, research, and extension or service. In India, we call it an extension. In most of the Western universities, they refer to as service. So teaching, research, and service. Now, only thing is they vary in their emphasis. There are some universities which are teaching oriented. There are some which are like Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. They would like to call themselves as research oriented. And whereas in public state universities, they are more teaching oriented because the mandate is such so. And also have service or extension component. But we need to revise that. And that's what the NEP says. Let's focus on the function, not on the ownership. That's why it recommends In the draft, they had used the word type 1, type 2, type 3. In the suggestions received to the draft, there was this confusion that most of them suggested, oh, it's very hierarchical. No, research universities are type 1, teaching university type 2, and degree awarding autonomous colleges are type 3. So that's why the word reference to type 1, type 2, type 3 is taken out in the revised version. It has been kept by name. That is, going forward, that is the new universities must have or be part of these three types of universities. That is either this, either this, or this. I'll come to that. Or, and the existing ones will be given next 15 years time, over a period of time, to evolve into one of these three types. That is one. What are those three types? The type one is research intensive university, which place equal emphasis on teaching and research and dedicate themselves to cutting edge research. Number one. Number two is teaching intensive universities, those that place greater emphasis on teaching but still conduct significant research, right? Number three, autonomous degree granting college will refer to a large multidisciplinary institution of higher learning that grants undergraduate degrees and is primarily focused on undergraduate teaching, though it would not be restricted to the general or be a smaller than a typical university. That's why they are calling it as college, because the definition of university means it has to engage in all UG, PG, and PhD program. Here we are talking about specifically focused on undergraduate degrees, and hence as a result of that, it is called as, still continues to use as college. But these two must have must align to this definition: multidisciplinary across all levels, but the focus can vary in terms of teaching and or research. But there's a confusion again to most of them, thinking that research intensive university will only do research. No, it says equal emphasis on teaching and research, dedicate themselves to cutting edge research. Teaching intensive doesn't mean they don't have to do only teaching. They have to also do emphasis will be on teaching, but still conduct significant research. So there's a fine balance that has to be made, and that balance or that kind of engagement must be visible, because each of these institutions must develop institutional development plans, IDPs, short-term, mid-term. Short-term meaning 3 years, mid-term meaning 5 years, and long-term meaning 10 years. Vision document will reflect what is their focus and emphasis and how they would like to implement, and that is to be approved by the board of governors. So in a way, this types. But another last point here I would like to make. One is the 8 types of university, which is a complex structure today, typology. Two, these 3 new types, number one. Number two is they are focused on function, research as a function, teaching as a function, degree granting as another function. And third, there is no hierarchy here, type 1, type 2, type 3. If today I am college A is a degree awarding, becomes a degree granting college. Tomorrow, next 10 years or 5 years, they feel, okay, we are ready to become teaching intensive. They have a choice to be flexible and move or go up in the order of teaching intensive. Or a teaching intensive university today, in next 10, 15 years feels that, okay, we're ready to become research intensive. So that kind of flexibility and that kind of a vision is embedded in NEP 2020. This often doesn't get reported or discussed much. They feel they are watertight compartments. They are not watertight compartments. They are subject to some sort of flexibility there, depending on the need and the context. The second set of points under NEP says, what does institutional restructuring consolidation mean? How do we go doing it? It gives a brief indication of the process. It says there should be a stage-wise mechanism for granting graded autonomy to colleges through a transparent system of graded accreditation, which would be established by the National Accreditation Council. And there is also critique which came that, okay, you're asking a college to become degree awarding autonomous college. Who would support them? Who would advise them? That's why NEP says those colleges based on the graded autonomy will be encouraged, mentored, supported, and incentivized to gradually attain the minimum benchmarks required for each level of accreditation to become degree awarding autonomous colleges. So there is a mechanism which has to be built in, and each state now has to think on how do we encourage them, how do we mentor them, how do we support them, and how do we incentivize them. And as I said, with appropriate accreditation, an autonomous degree granting college could evolve into research intensive or teaching intensive university if they so aspire as per the NEP. And higher education institutions will have autonomy and freedom to move gradually from one category, as I said. Then by 2040, the temporality. Again, this is another confusion. Nothing will happen overnight because these are systems which are in place, which takes time to change. That's why NEP says by 2040, all higher education institutions shall aim to become multidisciplinary. The new ones, as the state government decides, could put this as a benchmark, that this is must, that every institution which will be given permissions henceforth must have multidisciplinary. That could be one possibility. I don't know whether it's been done, but at least in state of Karnataka, they are thinking on those lines. And then the existing ones, which are specialized unidisciplinary kind of institution, will be given another 20 years time to evolve and become multidisciplinary institutions, and shall aim to have larger student enrollments, preferably in the thousands, not hundreds, at least in thousands, for optimal use of infrastructure and resources, and for the creation of vibrant multidisciplinary communities. As a result of that, as I said, higher education should firstly plan to become multidisciplinary by 2030. At least they do not become research intensive, teaching intensive, but at least they should start phase wise, step wise. By 2040, that is a vision. But at least to start with, they can start thinking of building. If they are agriculture university, they should start having social sciences. They should start having sciences. Slowly building on that, become multidisciplinary in nature. And the last set of points before I come to the conclusion to talk through about what is NEP talking about institutional restructuring consolidation is that by 2030, there shall be at least one large multidisciplinary higher education institution in or near every district. And that's subject to the state government and their plans, so that they are able to provide land, they are able to provide support in, as I said, mentoring, incentivization, support, and so on and so forth. To be achieved, so the accessibility is enhanced. This has not got enough media attention. I would like to bring to your notice that NEP doesn't say that it should be exclusive to urban areas. It has to be every district, and that's where the state government has to do it in consultation with appropriate stakeholders. Growth will be in both public private. One thing I can suggest in NEP is the principle the NEP adopted was public institutions need attention, immediate attention, because it has accessibility, equity component. Private institutions will be important, and they'll continue to be important, but they will be emphasizing on public institutions at the same time, not seeing any difference between public and private, in the sense that private institutions are able to sustain by itself in terms of their innovation and creation, and as well as the principle of demand and supply. But public institutions are struggling. One has to focus them immediately, and as a result of that, they need to develop a large number of outstanding public institutions, while private institutions will be given autonomy to develop by themselves, which is the norm, which is also in current practice. But the ineffective regulatory system will provide them more and more space to evolve and develop themselves. At the same time, strengthen the public institutions. So that has to happen parallelly. Then institutions will have an option to run open distance learning. As you have seen today, due to COVID, it has become very critical, especially online programs. Already one implementation plan has been proposed. Those who are ranked in the better in NIRF, I think top 100 in NIRF, are able to offer ODLs or online education also, especially, and that becomes very critical. But that's not aligned to the NEP directly, but it is an offshoot of the fact that there was a pandemic and we had to respond to it. But NEP had recognized the importance of ODL and online program, and it appreciated the social stigma attached to ODL, and that's why it says quality ODL becomes very important. Now, what are the salient points to conclude? I would like to have more time for discussion. That's why I'm rushing a little bit. Salient points. How do we now bring the policy life cycle, the context and the challenges of the policy which were identified, and the main policy recommendations for institutional consolidation and restructuring? How do we then bring them together? Number one is the policy recommendations for institutional architecture and consolidation should not be seen in silo or in isolation from reforms that have been provided or recommendations that have been made in terms of changing the regulatory system, reforms in school education. To give an example, NEP says at the grade, at 9th grade itself, students should be exposed to multidisciplinary learning and teaching, so that they become ready by the time they come to higher education to opt for or engage with the multidisciplinary focus that is envisaged, as I showed in the previous slides. Regulatory system. When the regulatory system is becoming light but tight, right? Institutions must be ready to acknowledge and appreciate that light but tight principle. Then changes are envisaged in institutional governance. So accordingly, institutional architecture and consolidation which is happening should also appreciate changes in institutional governance. And National Research Foundation, which is supporting most of the faculty across social sciences and science, And when we are talking about institutional restructuring in terms of making them multidisciplinary research universities, NRF becomes very important policy recommendation to support that. So each of these points for institutional restructuring consolidation should not be seen in isolation of other recommendations. They are going very much in hand, and there has to be a holistic implementation, not in parts. Then emphasis on indigenous model. The NEP envisages that we are not talking about this large multidisciplinary universities as something which is a gift of somebody else. It is our own model which we have already practiced, experienced, unfortunately forgotten. I think we need to revisit that and reflect whether that model can still be followed, right? One of the critiques is it's American model. Now, American or British model, that is another thing, because we were exposed to British model of university system, but we had our own indigenous model which can be reflected and thought about and see whether it can, rejuvenate itself to the present system and present need to the kind of model it was. Then shift from ownership to function, as I said, private, state and all is true, but at the same time, function is important, teaching, research and extension or service in order to ensure utmost autonomy. And then for us, both of us who are listening here, faculty members, there is a lot of transformation. If the NEP gets its due attention holistically to implementation, we need to be at the forefront as teachers especially, and of course students, both wise and administrators, to transform our pedagogy, transform our curriculum to enhance cognitive abilities and creative thinking. And we have to also have different roles that we need to adopt as faculty members. And then as a result of these changes, accreditation is becoming more and more important aspect and benchmark. And it enables holistic and multidisciplinary education if this institutional restructuring consolidation comes through. But at the same time, NEP argues for a fine balance between equity, excellence, and expansion in terms of the policy points as a recommendation, as a vision, or as a pathway. But state governments now, respectively, because education is a concurrent list, right, as you know, in the Constitution. So state governments also have to come together and see how they are able to see this fine balance and not to see them as mutually exclusive. Because in the name of excellence, you should not ignore equity. In the name of equity, you should not ignore excellence, while expansion is mandate, right, in higher education. So an implementation framework is due. Most of the states are responding to it. As I said, I'm part of the Karnataka's task force, which we are implementing. In next 3 days, we are having the task force report to be submitted to the government. Our Deputy Chief Minister had recently made a statement that we would be in the forefront to implement and make appropriate amendments to the acts, appropriate amendments to certain circulars to see this coming through. To give an example, we have two task force, we have one task force with two subcommittees. One subcommittee on governance and regulation for the state and see how NEP appropriates that. Another one for education, that is curriculum and pedagogy in higher education. So both of them have submitted. Now the task force is reflecting on their points, and then an appropriate action plan or implementation plan will be thought through. Especially institutional restructuring consolidation is very critical, and that would change our lives in the higher education sector. With that, I'll stop so that I can ask questions. Thank you so much. Over to you, to the organizers.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
Now I would request all the participants to write your questions or maybe raise your hands if you have any questions.
Ishita,
All right, Manisha ma'am
profession
wants to ask something. Let me unmute her.
Thank you so much, Ishita. And thanks a lot, for such a nice deliberation, sir. Definitely, keen listeners to the whole talk. What I really want to seek your clearance and your explanation about it, that the NEP lays a lot of emphasis on value-based education. If
Value.
I'm
Okay.
not
Value. Okay.
Yes. So, and moreover, skills added with value. To give you a little brief, since I'm a part of the AICT's national team for human values and all that as well. When we talk of, and a lot about Bhutan also, of course, I'm aware of. I've met a number of people from there as well. So, when we talk of skill And when we talk of values added to it, I find a little, glitch over there, because when we lay a lot of emphasis on development of skill. So somehow or the other, achieving the best as per the skill development is the focus. And when we really deal with the values, the human values, and the concept of value education, then in that case, a lot of flexibility is desired. So, how do we really wish to achieve the goal in totality in a holistic way?
Yeah. So,
I'm
yeah,
clear to
sorry.
you.
Yeah, I
Right.
get a sense of it, but if in my response, if I'm not clear, please do come back and clarify, madam. Thank you for that question, but I'll take few more questions. If there are any, then maybe I will respond to this question
Okay,
to the
sure, sure.
organizers. Yes, thank you.
Professor
Thank you.
Naveen Gupta also wants to ask something. Let me unmute you. Sir, you can ask the question. Professor Naveen Gupta, sir. Sir, if you have a question, you can ask. All right. I think Dr. K. Bhim Kumar wants to ask a question. So you can unmute yourself from your side and you can ask the question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chetan Singhal, for a very nice presentation.
Thank you.
Since I am from Department of Philosophy, University of Allahabad, those issues which we have discussed, really, I don't have much idea, but it's really a very good clarification. Just I would like to clarification.
Sure.
Is there any focus on particularly with regard to language? Which language, whether we have to go for vernacular or which language, does it focus NEP most probably? So can you simply focus on this issue?
Sure, sir.
This was not there.
Thank you, sir. Any other question? Then we can, maybe you can see the chat. I can see the chat.
Yes, sir.
There was one question on MPhil program. So maybe I will also address that. So coming back to this issue about skill and value education, I think, madam, I think, yeah, what has happened till date is that we are seeing even silos within that. When we talk about value-based education, it was more often to be seen as values of constitutionality, values of morality, and all those things. On the other hand, skill development was more on training mode or capacity and capability building mode. But what NEP says is that that students or learners, especially in higher education, must be given choice to choose from a variety of courses that are offered under the concept of life skills. When life skills bring both of them together, because when you talk about life skills, it is both the first part that I mentioned, the value-based education, and the second part in terms of communication skills or soft skills that we talk about. So that's why the NEP consciously uses the word life skills, and that kind of harnesses both. And I think that could be one possible way of acknowledging your concern and challenge of how do you bring them together. And also in this context, let me also tell you that NEP makes it very clear, at least in the draft it is very clear, and that because most of the members who are associated with the draft would have been also speaking about it, is going forward there has to be no categorization of this labels or nomenclatures called as curricular, extracurricular, and co-curricular. Everything has to be curricular. In other words, even if it is extracurricular, co-curricular that we call, which gets very less attention from the parents, from at the school level for the students, and at the higher education level, even students who tend to consider extracurricular, co-curricular as additional. And as a result of that, some of them would only focus on curricular. So if we give credits, appropriate credits, that is academic credits that we give for curricular program, should for co-curricular and extracurricular, not calling them as co-curricular, extracurricular, then the due attention is also given to both skill development and value-based education, because right now it has become an additional component or an auxiliary component of higher education system. But life skills is one, and second is this nomenclature should gradually go off and should not exist between these three categories, is another response I can think of to your question. I hope I've addressed your question. Second is about languages. At the higher education level, as I mentioned, sir, that there has been lot of emphasis on institutional autonomy. And at the same time, those institutions would be given due choice to engage either in choice of their language, but they don't specifically mention that vernacular language must be used in higher education. It is subject to the institution in terms of how they would want to engage. But if you're looking at a multidisciplinary kind of a program, if you're looking at a, research oriented program, then I think we need to align to the 21st century expectations of how you want to engage with, and that's left to the institution. There's no specific mention that this is the language that has to be taught or used for teaching and all those things for higher education. Of course, school education, we talk about three things: home language, mother tongue. There is a choice given there, but in higher education, there is no such specific mention, and that choice is left to the institution, as long as they're able to contribute to the definition of the university, as long as they're able to contribute to the outcomes that are expected. But both are open-ended, and respective state governments must be now reflecting and thinking about it. That choice is there for them. Now, the MPhil question, there's a very interesting article by Professor Bibek Debroy, who is an economist. Most of you might have heard. Recently, he wrote in, if I'm not wrong, Financial Times or Financial Express, either of that. You can Google it for those who have asked this question, who strongly recommends to end MPhil program. Not just for the sake of the quality of MPhil program, less said the better about it, at least what we have seen in Dr. Balram committee, which I was part of, the whole process, but from resource optimization. And he gives facts of All India survey that the total number of enrollment in MPhil at a particular stage was 3 times higher than the total enrollment in PhD of that period of time. Means the purpose of MPhil is lost. While we have seen lakhs of MPhil enrollment, the translation to PhD is in only thousands. So the purpose, for example, that's one example he gives, and he gives a detailed explanation. I will not like to belabor much on it, but I'm just giving you insight to think about it. The purpose itself is lost, and as a result of that, NEP strongly recommends also that, and after getting consultations and due inputs from others, has taken a decision that MPhil should be discontinued. But it gives a suggestion. The suggestion is to empower the undergraduate and postgraduate program, so much so that they're able to get into PhD program at the earlier, and young minds tend to engage with PhD at the earlier time. That is the process in which we need to see the optimism behind it. To those who asked that question on MPhil. Yes, so, yes.
Okay, Dr. Chetan, this is Dr. Manisha Shukla
Yes.
from BBDA ITM again. And I'm sorry because there's one thing, one more curiosity that really entered my mind while I was listening to you very seriously and sincerely. Though with respect to MPhil, of course, I have the same kind of an opinion regarding what you have expressed right now. But you know, when I think of places like Ashoka University, which already has a liberal system of education for quite a few number of years, right? So if I perceive it rightly, the new education policy is, I mean, of course, the policy is a much larger platform, but Ashoka has the same kind of a vision, if I perceive it very correctly, because I mean, I've just known it heretically, and except for my niece is studying there, that is also one of the parts. So now the point is that, you know, when we talk of skill development, right? So if the skill development is concerned, let's say that I want to be a computer scientist, fine. And there are courses related to the same field. And when we talk of a liberal system of education, so computer science is just a part of it, and the rest of them may be X, Y, Z, any kind. You know, like if the focus is on a particular area and the excellence and skill in that particular area, then don't you think that will be diluted to some extent?
I would, yeah. I sorry, you were saying something. Would you want to complete that point?
No, that's okay. That's okay. That's it.
So let me paraphrase the question so that I get the question. So that, because you had examples in the question, you are trying to say is that the proposal of multidisciplinarity would be detrimental to pursuing specific or specialized knowledge in a particular domain. Is that what you're trying to say, madam?
Right.
Now, yeah, so I'm glad I got it. So I would say, to start with, I would say maybe not. I will tell you why. That's my point of view, and why NEP talks about it. See, there are even in Ashoka University, as an example that you took, maybe that's I can talk through it. They are a liberal studies institution. They are focusing on humanities and social sciences and so on and so forth. But they also give sufficient choice to individuals to apply that knowledge to various domains, right? Even a social science student, like political science student, can engage in aspect of cyber security given training to them or given
Right.
appropriate capacity building to them. But the point is that are we trying to push our young minds into a career situation where they're making choices very early before even realizing whether it was of their interest? The NEP wants to provide that space to them to be open, to be thoughtful and creative until at least they move into a level at post graduation or fourth year undergraduation, so that they get good 4 to 5 years of time to think whether I made a right choice or not. So that's why that multiple entry exit choice across disciplines is been envisaged, and also a type of that fact that after 1 year you don't feel like continuing to study, you can go out, come back for the second year, but you will get a certificate for that 1 year. And if you come back for second year and complete second year, you get a diploma. Again, you can go out and come back. So that flexibility, and not only in terms of levels but also in terms of discipline. Right now, a science student who is pursuing science is having so much of choice. They can get into commerce, they can get into arts, but as art student or social science student has no choice. They are almost compelled to continue in that frame. So that is also an extreme situation. So coming back to your question, madam, I would say the multidisciplinarity component is something which is envisaged with that point of view, that students should not get into early specialization. At the same time, faculty should also not get associated with the discipline so much they don't get out of that silo, like the frog in the well. So that is where it has to be seen from the student point, the faculty point, and the campus point of view, the vibrancy that multidisciplinarity brings on a campus also. And then look at the knowledge economy point of view, that how it adds value to creativity and innovation, both at scientific advancement, technological advancement, cultural advancement, social advancement, and economic advancement. And that is where we are seeing the best institutions in the world who are located in various parts of the country or world have been doing that, right? But we tend to become too early into that specializations, and we become victims of that, is what I think. But I hope I have responded to your question on those lines.
Definitely, definitely, very right,
Thank you.
very right, sir. Because I have a few friends who are hardcore physicists. They went to, great universities abroad, and now they are working totally in the field of sociology.
Yes.
And that's very interesting. But being a hardcore scientist in physics and then moving on to like working for the Middle East or working for those places and totally based on sociology. So that's a great
Yeah.
answer. And of course, I'm all for the new education policy, and I definitely appreciate n number of points. But of course, a critical thinking about each point is a must, and therefore we
Absolutely.
must put up all the
Absolutely.
queries that we have. Thank you so much.
That's our birthright. We have to be critical about what's coming to us and engage with
Definitely.
that. In fact, I would like to
Absolutely.
add quickly, our professor from philosophy department would maybe acknowledge it. One of the best minds in philosophy and physics have become great minds in social science and science, including
Absolutely.
the founding, the father of political science. Aristotle was a person from physics. Now he is the
Yes.
father of political science. He brought logic
Absolutely.
to political science. Anyway, so let's. Yeah, thank you for your question.
Thanks a lot.
You exposed a lot of things.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, to Ishita Mishra. Any?
Yes.
Congratulations also for such a nice deliberation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, so there are a few questions in the chat box as well. Professor Murlidhar Sethi asked that is it possible to carry out the objectives of NEP without manpower, as shortage of manpower is a major concern in the HEIS?
Yeah, this is a practical issue, Professor Muralidhar sir, because now there is a shortage of manpower, but the question I would like to raise for discussion is, why is there a shortage of manpower? Now, one is we have not given due attention to our higher education system in order to create faculty members, because teaching had not, and if I'm not wrong, even now has not received its due attention as a preferred destination for our career. Maybe it's in terms of salaries, in terms of the jobs that we engage and all those things. Like earlier how it was, always people used to have that societal prestige and respect for teaching. But now in the last 20-30 years, we have seen gradual decline. It's not that it's gone completely, as long as you are able to contribute. But teaching now has to become a destination. The manpower is there. Maybe as Ishita herself mentioned, the demographic dividend is out there. We are the best in the world in terms of demographic dividend, the young demographic dividend. But taking them to teaching becomes very important. And I think that is where the policy has to now translate into action, wherein it becomes incentivized, supported, mentored for the cause that this manpower which is out there, the qualified manpower, should be attracted towards teaching profession. And hence objectives of NEP can be implemented that way, is my optimism towards it. But I appreciate your concern, and that's the biggest concern, and that leads to a challenge. But again, institutional restructuring consolidation could help in overcoming that challenge, as well as making teaching as an attractive profession and domain for our young minds and young population would be very important. Yes. So
Thank you, sir.
should I go over the order of the chat box, or would you lead me to that, Ms. Ishita?
Yes, sir. I'll do that for you. So Professor Mayank Verma asked that is this NEP? In this NEP? What's the new policy for teacher educators?
Teacher educators at the level of college or school or higher education, Professor Mayank Verma. I'll assume it is higher education because we are discussing higher education. So I'll make it in response to two contexts. One is the entire rejuvenation and revamping of the B.Ed program, because one of the major challenges we found in the NEP process was that there are a lot of this what is it called, fly-by-night institutions. Fly-by-night meaning there's a name but the institution doesn't exist, especially for our B.Ed programs especially. And NEP then recommends that going forward there has to be a 4-year undergraduation program for B.Ed, and this 4-year undergraduation program should not be provided or offered in private higher education institutions as such, or standalone institutions as such, because it goes against the principle of multidisciplinarity and the definition of university is one. And also it checks those problems of teacher educators coming from that kind of fly-by-night institutions or not so well performing institutions. Instead, that 4-year undergraduation program that has already been announced by NCTE last, I think beginning of this year, last year it was announced that henceforth teacher education B.Ed program must be 4-year undergraduation. And to add to that, what is new in addition to that is that 4-year program must be offered in a university setup under department or faculty of education, not as independent standalone institutions of teacher education. So I hope you get the spirit of that in order to engage, so that they become holistic educators while they're part of this environment of teaching education. And third is, I would say, the emphasis on cognitive skills, learning outcomes, etc., becomes very critical. And teacher educators or teachers in the higher education faculty members should be at the forefront, with another component that research for research is there, but research for teaching becomes very important. Students must be able to be given updated knowledge about the curriculum, not to carry the same old PowerPoints which they used to carry earlier or the notes, but teachers have to become researchers to make sure there's a research-based teaching, not just research for research, which is important, but that is one part, but research for teaching becomes very important. So that's also been reflected at least in the research intensive university and teaching intensive university in the institutional consolidation restructuring. These are all which have come out through consultation. It is not that we are reading from a book. So this is that way. Last point, what is new? It is evidence-based policy. Thank you.
So another question is from Professor Bijaya Kumar Nayak, and he asked that does NEP emphasizes more on flexibility that is free from the clutches of parent university and state government?
Absolutely. I'll answer in one line, that 2 lines. One is it wants to end affiliating university system. And second, the emphasis on independent board of governors in each of the institutions, which are of these 3 types going forward by 2040, clearly says that it wants to take away the unfortunate and unwarranted control of affiliating universities in cases where they are like that, right? Or in cases which is not like that, they want to even anyway streamline it to 3 types. So yes, absolutely, you're right. Bang on, Professor Vijay Kumar Nayak. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Professor Yogesh Kumar asked that what is expected of faculty in higher education under NEP?
Yeah, so the NEP's only expectation is 2 parts. One is It expects the respective state governments to implement, and most important is that we faculty members deliver it at our institutional level. I think it is more to see that NEP suggests, as I mentioned earlier, faculties must become researchers also, but for both research for research and research for teaching. Second, they make the best out of the autonomy given to them going forward. And third is to make sure that they inculcate multidisciplinarity along with skill-based education and vocational education for the students so that they become employable for going forward. These are the quick comments on it, but there are a lot, and NEP is dependent on faculty members to make sure that it is implemented at the micro level, while the state governments must support appropriately. Yeah. Thank you for raising that question, Professor Yogesh Kumar. I can say it in other words, it is of the teachers, by the teachers, and for teachers and its fraternity, which includes students and administrators, if I want to say that. Yeah.
Yes, so another question is from Mohammad Aslam, Professor Mohammad Aslam, that, okay, he asked that the implementation is the major issue here. The policy is good, but the implementation is the issue here.
I agree, because it is the spirit and the passion and the intent of the respective state governments now. And I'm glad there are at least few states who have already responded to look into and think about implementation. Unfortunately, the pandemic gives us some difficult situation to engage, but at least the thinking can happen now so that the implementation framework and the roadmap is finalized. And once we are out of this start, we can get into implementation. But I would be still optimistic because some of the implementations are already been made. As I said, 4-year undergraduate program is already been discussed and announced. And IITs, IIMs have now been given degree awarding status. They can now award degrees, and their PGDM programs have now has got equal status of regular master's degree. So these are small changes which are based on not much financial implications, but with regard to implications which are supposed to be done through circulars, guidelines, and other such amendments. And in comment of Karnataka, an example is they're amending the State University Act also, wherein they're replacing the word university with higher education institutions. For example, I'm just sharing. So this can be seen at an incremental level. As a whole, maybe not today or tomorrow, but incrementally it would be happening in due course. Yeah, I agree with you. And I ended my presentation. The last point was on that. It all depends upon institution. But again, I'll repeat the earlier point. While the state government's response to implementation, it is our duty to start thinking how we can be ready for it as faculty members, if you align to that framework. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So Professor Muralidhar Sethi asks another question, that is there any provision for regular orientation of teaching faculty?
Yes, career advancement and professional development becomes part of the NEP document. And if you refer to page 40 to 41, there's a discussion on that, wherein they talk about, as I said, incentivizing faculty members, mentoring faculty members at the institutional level, as well as at the National Research Foundation, NRF, also recommends for mentorship to faculty members pursuing research, so that appropriate mentorship happens for them to handhold them and engage. So orientation can happen at the institution level as well at the systemic level like NRF, and respective state higher education commissions council, which ideally should become state higher education regulatory authorities, must provide appropriate mechanisms for orientation of teaching faculty or faculty members. So there are 2-3 mechanisms which have been built in, and that can be harnessed here. But institution becomes very important, and the leadership and governance of institution becomes very important for regular orientation of faculty members and yourself also individually.
So another question is from Professor Rashmi Priya ma'am. She says that if I am not wrong, a dedicated focus has been on regional language, and it encourages teachers and students to carry forward their study in their own language. But sir, if here I want to ask that ultimately English is our official language when it comes to working environment. Many students face difficulty in reading and writing in English. They struggle so hard to establish themselves in this competitive world. So how can we overcome this challenge on national level?
I'm not sure. I appreciate her kind of uncertainty about that point, and I would like to suggest that NEP does not at higher education level, as I told to earlier professor of philosophy who asked, sorry, I forgot his name, sorry sir. but it does not very evidently say that it has to promote regional language or education. In fact, it says appropriate mechanisms have to be built in order to value and appreciate the local context of learning, education, and research, because we should not forget that our local context is very important to engage in. So that is where maybe soft skill training, life skill training, other things in the regional languages can be provided, so that ultimately I agree with you that it is our official language, but the thinking, the creativity can also happen in our local language. That is how Nalanda Takshashila also evolved and promoted themselves into creative and innovative thinking. But the point is, NEP does not mandate it, that it has to be in regional language. So that's a clarification to you, but a value add to that clarification I would like to make is that it has to harness both, but maybe we can use that for our purpose of research and engagement and bring it back to our writing to the maximum. And even if you're writing regional language, you have the scope to translate it into English and disseminate to the wider audience and to the global world. Yeah.
So now the question is from Professor Supriya Prusti. Does this NEP emphasize that knowledge gain should be taught critically and be applied to the practical life?
I can see the message here. Does this NEP emphasize that knowledge gain should be taught critically and be applied? Yes. When we talk about vocational education, skill-based education, competence-based education, employability-driven education, learning outcome-oriented education, it is definitely outcome-based in terms of applied, and more importantly, problem-solving. So NEP talks about all the first four I said: competence-based education or learning. In fact, it doesn't use the word education more. You might have seen that document very closely if you've read. The word learning comes more often than education. So there's a lot of prominence given to the learner, and at the same time, problem solving, multidisciplinarity, all of this are supposed to be applied in nature. And as a result of that, they have to engage in solving issues and problems that are immediate to our surrounding, our concerns, and to our discipline, so that we can think of creativity and innovation there. And as I mentioned in the first slide, very limited research on the higher education scenario from India is an opportunity for us to apply for it. Right? Yeah. And there's a last question here, or should I, Ishita, take it up, or would you?
Yes, sir, please take the question.
Please highlight the term complex triad. Yeah, when I said complex triad between autonomy, institutional and teacher autonomy, ineffective regulatory system, and institutional restructuring, that triad, I was saying that on one hand, we see that to address one, the other two are important. You know, there's a very strong relationship. To, if you reform one, the other one has to reform. To reform another, the other one has to accommodate. So that's a very problematic triad. And NEP tries to engage with it by becoming holistic and recommend certain policies at each level. That's why I was trying to put it. There are 11 challenges, but these 3 challenges are complex and in a way are mutually dependent on each other to be engaging in implementation as well as to reform the higher education system. That's what I meant by that, to Prakhar Tripathi. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, I think that is the end of the questions.
Yeah. And I think Dr. Muralidhar Sethi is acknowledging the efforts of the university to organize FDP. I would align to you that there must be orientation refresher program, and the team at the university must be very proud of that, because there are echoes coming from the participants that there's a need of such programs. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, sir. So I think, sir, we should stop taking any more questions now because we have limited time. And I would really, first of all, like to thank you, sir, for giving such a nice lecture. I mean, the chat box is flooded with compliments. It's very difficult to find the questions there. So thank you so much. And now I would request Professor Dr. Monica Mehrotra, ma'am. She is the director of BBD Engineering College. She has been an academic since 2001. Currently, she has been nominated as a member of steering committee formed in the Higher Education Department of UP State Government in the leadership of Additional Chief Secretary, Mrs. Monica S. Garg, ma'am. This committee has been formed for the implementation of national education policy in higher education institutes, including all government and private universities. Dr. Mehrotra is representing BB Educational Group in that steering committee. So I would request ma'am to please present the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Shivangi. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all the delegates and participants to the FDP, which is organized by BBD ITM. BBD ITM has always been ahead of its time, a known name working with great passion and commitment towards education. Dr. Bhavesh Singh Chauhan, Director BBD and ITM, I appreciate him for the initiative to organize this FDP in such a short time. I am also thankful to the management of BBD Educational Group, Mrs. Alka Das Gupta ma'am, Chancellor BBD University, Mr. Virat Sagar Das sir, Pro-Chancellor BBD University, Ms. Sonakshi Das Gupta, Vice President BBD Group, Dr. A.K. Mittal, Vice Chancellor BBD University, for providing us this opportunity. They have been our wings of flight and pillars of strength and support. We are honored to be under their guidance. I extend a warm thanks to the eminent speaker of today, Dr. Chetan Singhai, Deputy Director, RPPC, Bangalore. Thank you so much, sir. You have really explained this a large policy in such a in such a small time. You have given us so much of knowledge about the policy, and I'm sure by listening to Chetan Singhai sir, all of you will have a clear vision of the policy, and you will be definitely able to contribute in the process of implementation. Once we are ready with the draft of the policy, then we will definitely be in a position to implement it in our university, in our colleges. So by listening to sir, and later on you will be listening to such eminent speakers which are in the panel, I'm sure all of you will be definitely benefited a lot and will be able to contribute in the implementation process. So I thank you everyone. Thank you Bhavesh sir. Thanks to the organizing committee of this FDP for this initiative, and all the best to all the participants for the further sessions of the FDP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, and all the best again to all the participants. I look forward to see you and me together working towards implementation of NEP 2020 for a better 2040. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now it is time for a formal vote of thanks. And for that, I would request Mr. Adarsh Dwivedi to please present the formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ishita. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to take this moment and thank Honorable Speaker and Resource Person, Dr. Chetan Singhai, sir, for taking out his valuable time and sharing his words of wisdom with us. Sir, every word spoken by you has inspired us to the core. We cannot thank you enough. You have explained in such a nice way the concept of the challenges in India, higher education ecosystem, policy objectives. You have told us the major challenges and you have told us the three major challenges, and you told us the learner-centric concept, and you told us multidisciplinary institution of higher learning and many more things. I hope this fruitful session will add value to our lives. This brings me to the people without whom this FDP would not have been possible. Our first and foremost, our chief patron, Mrs. Alka Das Gupta ma'am, Chairperson BBD Group of Education. Sri Virat Sagar Das sir, President of BBD Group. Dr. Arvind Jamkhedkar sir, Chairman ICHR, Ministry of Education, Government of India. Professor Ramesh Chandra Singh sir, Chairman, Indian Council of Philosophical Research, Ministry of Education, Government of India. Our patron, Professor Dr. A.K. Mittal sir, Vice Chancellor, BBD University. Professor Dr. Bhavesh Kumar Chauhan sir, Director, Babu Banarsi Das Institute, Technology and Management. Professor Kumar Ratnam sir, Member Secretary, ICHR and ICPR, Ministry of Education, Government of India. And Dr. Omji Upadhyay, he is the Director of Indian Council of Historical Research, Ministry of Education, Government of India. Professor Dr. Monica Mehrotra ma'am, Director of Babu Banarsidass Engineering College. Our heartfelt thanks goes to Professor Dr. Shivangi Tiwari ma'am. She is the Assistant Professor, Department of Management, Babu Banarsidass Institute of Technology and Management, and our Organizing Secretary member, Dr. Suresh Kumar sir, Assistant Director, Seminar, ICHR, Ministry of Education. Our organizing coordinators, Dr. Sushil Dubey sir, Program Officer, ICPR, Ministry of Education, Government of India. And at last, Ms. Priyanka Singh ma'am, Assistant Professor of Department of Management, BBD, ITM, Lucknow, without whose perseverance, ideas, and guidance, this FDP was unimaginable. And I would like to thank rest of the faculty who are present over here. Our student coordinators, Prakhyat Jaiswal, Ishita Misra, Simran Singh, and Ayush Agrawal, who managed this FDP with all their heart and hard work, showing their true traits of a manager. Last but not the least, heartiest thanks to our participants who took their keen interest in the program and made this FDP a successful one. Thank you one and all present here. With this is me, Adarsh Trivedi, signing off. Stay indoors, stay motivated, stay safe. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Over
so
to
much,
you,
Adarsh.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I think it is time to wind up. I again thank all of you, all the participants, on behalf of the entire organizing team. And I also apologize if some of the questions are not answered. Due to time constraints, we were bound to end it, and I'm really apologetic of it. But however, the session was very interesting, and I hope each one of us learned so much from it.
I request the organizers to share the questions by email. I'll be more than happy to respond to them by email at any point of time.
So we will share all the questions.
Yes,
with
it'll be
you
good
by
for
your
us to
email.
learn, as well
Thank
as
you.
if I missed out any question, I'll be happy to respond to it. Thank you.
And thank you so much, sir,
Thank
for
you.
accepting our invitation.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me with all of you. And Chavan sir, thank you so much for your introduction. I look forward to, after the pandemic is over, physically come and meet all of you. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
That will be our honor as well as pleasure to
Sure, sir.
welcome you in
Sure,
person.
sir. Sure, sir. Dhanyavad, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Director,
Bye.
sir, with the permission, we would like to end this meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Shivangi.
Kindly go ahead, please. Thank you. Thank you, Ishita Mishra, and thank you, Dr. Shivangi Tiwari.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.